as humanists, we recognize that people around the world gather on a consistent basis around a common belief system. And I think we constantly ask ourselves, like, what is it all for? Like, why have we done this for centuries? And what can we learn about it as far as just like a human practice? What can we learn about this curious phenomenon and its persistence? So here to talk to us about the question of, is religion relevant in the 21st century, is Reverend Brian Ferguson from Unitarian Church, the Wildflower Church. So, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Jordan. I really appreciate it. I actually met Jordan about 2.5 months ago at my church. We were doing a panel around Code Next and affordability, and Jordan and I got speaking afterwards, and she invited me here. But of course, being a minister, Sunday's a busy time for me, and so it turned out April 8th was the day. So thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here today. Well, my first degree was a physics major. I was applied physics, which may seem like a strange path into ministry, and I'll talk a little about that. But Albert Einstein asked a very profound question. He said that, or profound statement. He said that when he's given a problem, he spends an hour thinking about the right question to ask. And once he finds the right question, it only takes 5 minutes to come up with the answer. So some questions can really be profound and eye-opening, and some questions are not. I was once asked, why were you born in Scotland? I, too, was confused by that question. And my answer was, I was young at the time and I wanted to be close to my mother. Which is also not a profound answer. And but one of the questions, I think one of the other questions, and this was alluded to in what Jordan said, that do you believe in God? I think it's one of the most useless questions you can ask someone. And that might sound strange coming from a minister. And one of the reasons I think it's a useless question, I don't think you can give it a meaningful answer. Because if you say yes, are you thinking of the theistic Christian God? Are you thinking of the Hindu Brahmin? Are you thinking of the Bodhisattva from the Buddhist tradition? Are you thinking of Gaia? Are you thinking of the planet? Are you thinking of the universe? Are you saying yes? Which one of those are you saying yes to? If you're saying no, are you saying no to the mystery of life? Are you saying no to the wonder that is the Big Bang that created this universe, the wonder of consciousness, wonder, amazement, the mystery? Are you saying no to all of those? So I think, do you believe in God is a useless question. The question I present to the congregation, I serve the Wildflower Unitarian Universalist Church in South Austin, and the question I present to them is, what do you love and what breaks your heart? What do you love and what breaks your heart? I think those are more useful religious questions, because what do you love? What do you love that inspires you to live your life fully? And what breaks your heart that calls you to action to transform the world? I think those are more meaningful questions to explore. And do you believe in God? God is just a way that people have historically and to this day found a way of making meaning in their life. And religion is at its best when we're trying to find meaning and purpose in our life. And I want to give you a story from my own experience, and it was at the Unitarian Universalist Church in San Francisco, which both showed me how a community can love someone who's in the most vulnerable part of their life, and how it also broke my heart. And it's a story of a young man called Nathan Sistoni. Now, I was a greeter at the San Francisco church. This was before I was a minister. And Nathan arrived. And I got to know him and I spoke to him and really connected with him. And I saw him after the service and talked to him further. And we had a really good conversation. And I must have been on my best behaviour because he came back. I didn't scare him off. And so I got to know him over the next a few months, and it turned out that Nathan was a transgender man. But his parents had rejected him while he went through his transition. He was about 27. And Nathan became more and more involved in our church and was very welcome. And the Unitarian Universalist Church of San Francisco a number of transgender people would come to the church. Often they would come just when they were in transition, when they were transitioning from one gender to the other, and then they would move on. But Nathan had already transitioned and came to a church regularly and became very involved. And then one time we were looking for like lay worship leaders. These are people who work with the ministers to prevent worship. So I talked to the ministers and asked, would Nathan, would you like to become a lay worship leader? And he looked at me and he said, do you think the congregation would be okay having a transgender worship leader? Or is that why you're asking me? I said, well, actually, I'm asking you because I think you're smart, funny, and a good communicator. And also I'm asking you because I'm 42 and I'm the youngest worship associate that we have. So I'm not a 27-year-old like yourself. And he laughed. And then he started to cry. And I was like, oh no, what did I say? I said, what's up, Nathan, what's up? He said, oh, that's what I love about this church. It reminds me of my full humanity. I sometimes forget that I'm fully human. And some people, not everyone sees that as a transgender man. And Nathan became a lay worship leader, became very involved. Then about a year later, I was talking to him, and he just told me that after 5 years, he'd been connected with his mother, who was willing to explore, and he'd just been up to Seattle. We were in San Francisco at the time. He'd been up to Seattle to visit her. And he was so happy to be reconnected with his family. And a few days after that, I got a phone call in my office at the time, and it was the minister of the church let me know that Nathan had died. He was killed in a car accident. And Nathan was supposed to be the lay worship leader the next Sunday, and the minister asked me about reading his reflection. And so I read, that Sunday, I read his reflection. You can imagine reading these deceased words. And it was a really incredible, powerful reflection, because this person who had so many struggles in his life, had been rejected his family, was able to see this hope and power. It was full of optimism. Even though he was so self-effacing, he described himself as, I'm a cross-eyed transgender dork, but I know God loves me. And that was what he said. And I think where he saw that love was in a community like this one, the community in the San Francisco church, a community that was loving someone who was often in the margins of society, even in somewhere like San Francisco, where, certainly the LGBT community is strong, but transgender was still challenging, perhaps still is challenging for many in our society. So I read those words, and they were really powerful. And there was a lot of tears in the church. And then I remember going home, and someone had sent me Nathan's obituary, and I read it all, and it talked about him. Then at the very end, it says, the coroner identified Nathan as a woman. Identified Nathan as a woman. And I remember being so angry. That broke my heart. That someone who fully identified and to me was a man was denied. Now, in some ways, I was angry at the coroner for that. But in some ways, the coroner was perhaps doing his job. Why did the newspaper have to say that? That was not how Nathan identified. And it was through that type of thing I realized that as a straight white man, it's very important for me in justice issues to be out there amplifying the voice of those in the margins, amplifying those who are most vulnerable, amplifying those who are underserved in our community. And I saw there was an example of someone who was loved and inspired me, and something that broke my heart and has called me to be a greater advocate for justice. Because it's not enough to be accepting, it's not enough to be embracing of those differences. We need to be advocates for those. And I think that's an important role that we take. Now, religion is a complex thing. And one of the ways to think of religion. If you actually think of religion as a four-legged stool, there was one up there. If you think of a four-legged stool, and there's four sources of meaning and interpretation that religion has. There's scripture, sacred text, there's tradition, there's experience and reason. And all four of those things, I think many human beings use to interpret, to find meaning in their life, to find inspiration in their life, to find sources of transformation. Now, we talk about scripture. Many of us in the North American context think of the Christian Bible. And there's a great comment from Dominic Crossan. I don't know how many of you know him. He's a Catholic scholar. But Dominic Crossan says this about how people interpret scripture. He says, ancient people, we think of ancient people told literal stories, and we are now smart enough to take them symbolically. But ancient people told them symbolically, and we are now dumb enough to take them literally. And I think that's where religion gets into problems. Because we take stories from the Bible and do a very literal interpretation, and they were never written that way. When the Greeks wrote their story of God up in Mount Olympus, they didn't literally think there. These were stories, these were myths to point to a higher truth. Something does not need to be true to be truthful, or to be meaningful, or to be inspirational. And that's one of the things that Scripture can be. Now, you probably have met, many of you may be familiar, there's lots of religious traditions, Christian traditions, where Scripture is taken literally. And I think that is problematic. The earth probably wasn't created in 7 days. I like to say that if anything, humans created God, God didn't create humans. Now, in the tradition, if you look at something like the Catholic Church, it's not quite so influenced by the Bible. It's more about the religious tradition through history over the last 2,000 years. And the Catholic Church is a great example of that. And then there's lived experience and reason. Now, as a Unitarian Universalist and a Unitarian Universalist religious leader, we believe, we put the emphasis on interpreting our lived experience through the use of reason. And when I showed this to my board and my church, all went, that sounds like us. I don't know if you're pleased or disappointed to hear that. But reality is known through reason. And one of the things we've been trying to do in the Unitarian Universalist tradition is make religion more reasonable and reason more religious. So what do I mean by that? Well, one of the ideas about making religion more reasonable, through the last 200 years of Unitarian Universalism, we've been really trying to bring a focus of reason both into religious interpretation. Perhaps looking at this idea of the traditional supernatural God, a God operating outside of nature, doesn't really make sense, isn't reasonable. And then the path of evolution and the story of the Big Bang gave us a different cosmological story, the origin of the universe through cosmology, through the Big Bang, and how life was created through the idea of evolution. And I think religion does not do itself a service if we reject science, if we reject social science. So I think it's really important that religion needs to be open to reinterpretation, and I think that's one of the things that marks liberal religion from more fundamentalist religion, or what I would call literal religion, where you're willing to critique. When we find out more information from the social sciences, from our own lived experience, from the hard sciences, then we need to reform our opinions and come up with a story. Because whether the universe was built maybe in 7 days, or whether it was from the Big Bang over billions of years, the important thing is, what does it mean? What difference does that mean for you now? How are you going to live differently? Because one of the things I feel about religion, it's often about how are we going to transform ourselves through the search for meaning, and how are we going to transform the world through acts of love? How are we going to transform ourselves through the search for meaning, and how are we going to transform the world through acts of love? And that's what really drives myself as a religious leader, because I believe I am called to embody love. Now, the term God is very loaded, as you can well know. As I mentioned earlier, there's so many interpretations. But one of the things I think religion does do, and especially religious community, was communities like this one are very important because you're asking questions and having serious conversations, and you're trying to find an expanded interpretation of the world. And I believe that's what we do in the religious tradition that I'm from. We're trying to find meaning, we're trying to reinterpret the world, not just as an end in itself. How do we wish to transform ourselves, and how do we wish to transform the world? And that's what calls us to social justice. And the African-American scholar Cornel West talks about how social justice is love made public. Social justice is love made public. And that's what calls a lot of the traditions to become involved in social justice. But interpretation's a tricky thing, because I would like to I'm going to go into a Bible story here, so go with me in this one, because I think it's a very important example of how interpretation, and how living in a multicultural context that we do now, which has not always been historically true in a lot of areas, living in a multicultural context, the idea is you can see different interpretations, and that can be enriching. I want to take the story from the Hebrew scriptures of the Exodus. Now, the Exodus, some of you may know, is the story of the Jews were enslaved by the Egyptians. Moses became their leader. They escaped from the Pharaoh, according to the story, with God's help. And they wandered the wilderness for 40 years. They went into Canaan and took it over. That's a hugely inspirational story to the African-American community. It's this idea of being freed by slavery. It was hugely influential in Martin Luther King. It was hugely influential in Malcolm X. It was hugely influential in much of the African-American tradition. What do the Native Americans think of that story? They don't see it as a story of liberation. They see it as a story of conquest. They see themselves as the Canaanites. So who's right? Is it a liberation or a conquest story? It's both. It depends on your interpretation. And I think that's the richness around the multicultural context that we can bring, this idea of being able to see things from multiple perspectives. And I think you look at the history of religion and religious thought, what happened? I mean, religion, predominantly Christian religion, was defined by old white men, usually old straight white men. And religion has often been used just to confirm the biases that they already have. But you look at what's happened historically, the black church, the black theology has brought an ethical component, like asking questions like, is God a white racist? It's a profound question, really. And then women have brought in the idea, this critique of theology from a feminist ethical perspective, like, well, why are women so frowned upon? The idea that Eve was the cause of all sins. Why is Adam not got anything to do with that? And so there's an idea of, and so what's happened this spring, and then the Latina community have come in and brought a feminist and a Latina critique. And so religion is its best where you get these ethical critiques of religious beliefs and values, and it changes as we learn from it. And multiculturalism has really brought that to us. The other thing that, for all the problems that religion has, one of the things religion has done is it does bring that sense of tradition, which can be helpful. And it also brings this idea of looking beyond the immediate future. Because when you create an institution, the idea is you hope that work that you do as part of that institution continues beyond your own life. Now, too often religion has become about, especially in the Christian tradition, has become about life after death. We just had Easter last week where the idea of resurrection was talked about. Well, Jesus came alive, and it's often used to justify this idea of life after death. But I think if we're really honest with ourselves, we don't know what happens when we die. And I think that's something that's best left to individual interpretation. So I understand the appeal of life after death, because someone asked me, what do you want to hear at your funeral? And the thing I want to hear is, look, Brian's moving. Get the appeal of resurrection and life after death, but I don't know. But what it does do, it gives us this idea of a longer perspective. Because I think one of the things that Unitarian Universalists, human beings struggle with is this idea of our own ego and our finite lifespan. It causes us to look in the short term. But the Quaker sociologist Eli Boulder has got this fascinating idea of thinking in terms of the 200-year present or the long now. I want to explore this idea of the 200-year present because I think it's fascinating. I want to use an example from my own life. My gran was born on the 1st of January 1900, which is awesome because every year you knew what age she was. I was really hoping she'd live till she was 100, but she died in 93. So I think about her. And then my mother was born in 1931. I was born in 1962. 65, for those of you wondering. My daughter was born in 2003. If she was to have a daughter, she might be born in the 2030s. There's a good chance she'll live till 2100. So the idea of the 200-year now is, think of the hand of the oldest person who you've touched and you've lived with. And think of the youngest person whose hand you'll touch and you'll influence. That's probably a 200-year span, 5 generations, 1900 to 2100. Now for myself, born in 1962, that 200 year now will be 2162. That's an influence that we'll have. How would that change how we view environmental work? How would that change how we go about social justice? And we realise it may not happen in our lifetime, because probably most of the things that are worth changing, like racism and sexism and avoiding environmental disaster, is probably not going to happen in our lifetime. We have to work in that span, and I think religious communities can do that. And religious communities are intergenerational, and I was pleased to hear Jordan say that you're looking to how to cater for children out there. I mean, that's really important, because if you've got 5 generations, I think of my gran. Now, I'd love to say my gran was a lovely, warm, kinded person. She was racist. She was sexist. She was a religious bigot. She loved me. And then my mum was an incredibly loving person, her daughter, and then there's myself. And so, which of these values do I want to pass on to my daughter and to hopefully a grandchild at some point? Because I think that's our role, this chain of being. What things do we want to block from getting passed on to the next generation? Those things like racism and sexism and transphobia and homophobia and just general bigotry. And what are the good values do we want to pass on? Love, kindness, compassion, those type of things. That is our role in life. What do we want to pass on to future generations? That is the 200 years now, or the long present. And I do want to finish up. Jordan Muir is a minister, so she gave me a warning that we do need to be out of here by 12:30. There's another story from the East African tribe, and I can't remember which tribe it is, I apologise for that. But they've got this idea of we face the past and the future's behind us. Because that's our past. We know what happened in the past. We know the events. It's not a mystery. The past is not a mystery to us. The future is a mystery. And I love that idea. But then I'll take that to the next step. We walk backwards into the future. We can't quite see where we're going. We don't really know. And have you ever tried walking backwards? It's not easy. I'll probably walk into you, so I won't do that, even though I'm a trained professional. But you walk backwards into the future, and it's uncertain. You can't quite see where you're going. And we do walk backwards into the future. So we can see our past. I can see the great traits of my gran and my mother. I can see the less great traits of them. I don't quite know, but I know what things I want to pass on, and I also want to know which things are blocked. I think that's where I see religious community, because what religion community does, religion means to bind together. That's the meaning of religion. And there's a positive around that of bringing a community together around common values, common ideals. It's not about, I don't think it's about beliefs. Beliefs can change, but we really want to ground ourselves in values of love, kindness, compassion, and justice. The mission of the Wildflower Church where I attend is growing spiritually together, spreading love, justice, and joy. Spreading love, justice, and joy. And I heard so much today in this gathering about connection. And ultimately, I think that's where meaning comes from. It's for finding ways to connect to ourselves, connecting to community around us, connecting to the world around us, and perhaps even connecting to something that we can't quite explain. I think the idea of connection is of primary importance in community, and whether you want to call it religious, spiritual, or something else, I think there's a huge need for that. I think if we can do that, we can ground ourselves communities in values of kindness, love, compassion, and justice. The world will be a little better tomorrow than it is today, and a little better today than it is tomorrow. I think that's an eternal human hope. So thank you.